questions with our colleagues at FDA. And, wow, and we didn't discuss them with that dog, but I'm sure. But that dog also has some very relevant information for us. Our colleagues at FDA have a strong role in the way that these products are standardized, the way that they're labeled for sale, and the manufacturing practices, but they can't in any way direct or regulate the availability of these products. And indeed, our colleagues at FDA only will know as much as we do, which is what the producers tell us. And that's what you were telling us just now, Dave.
Exactly. I mean, it's kind of a hard situation, but we've just got to keep our fingers crossed, Do we have another question on the line? Okay, one of the questions we're getting is, a bottom line is that, again, there's some IGRA questions, which I really want to emphasize. I think is a whole other webinar, which we will do shortly. But, one of the questions they were asking with IGRAs, which is that when you're doing IGRAs for a contact investigation, just as you do with a skin test, do you do initial IGRA and then 10 weeks, post, to make sure that there is no quote-unquote conversion or delay in responding? In general, the answer is yes, if I'm correct, John.
That's what's in the recommendations now, with the caveat that's in the recommendations that we still don't have a lot of data that would tell us what is the time between infection and the conversion of an IGRA result from negative to positive. So the presumption is that it's in the same 8 to 10 week window that would be for skin testing, and a tiny amount of data supports that assumption, but I think it may play out to give a slightly different number eventually when we have more experience.
I agree. Hey, John Washington, are you still on the line? *7?
Yes, I am.
Hey, John, me and you had a conversation a little while ago, and I'm going to put you on the spot, but I'm seeing a couple people on the chat and asking questions similar to this, which is essentially, like we were kind of alluding to and you alluded to, when something like this happens, it makes us re-examine. And you put out a very, I think, an interesting question, which is, do you think that this is going to make people really re-examine the role of skin testing? And do you think that potentially, this could be, quote-unquote, the death to skin testing? Obviously, I'm saying that somewhat tongue-in-cheek because I think it's a little early. But there's a lot of questions, and I think something like this makes people really assess, why, the limitations of both skin testing as well as IGRAs. But I just was wondering what how you felt about, what this may do to skin testing.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. In our own program here, we've had to make, tough decisions like other states and local jurisdictions have as well about choosing between rapidly accelerating our implementation of IGRAs versus holding off on that. We have enough information, I think, about the IGRAs and healthcare workers, although it's not publicly released data, to suggest that that's not a good way to go at this time, at least with the currently available IGRAs for screening healthcare workers, the vast majority of whom really are at relatively low risk. And I think that's kind of the caveat. I think that much of the testing that we do out of an abundance of caution with TSTs is probably overkill, and it's done at the expense. It's done really without thinking much about risk factors. And what we see in our own practice is, even with TB suspects and confirmed cases, is that the history is the most overlooked part of the whole assessment process. And too much is hinging on the results of either one of these tests, whether it's an IGRA or whether it's a TST with either of the two products. So in the meantime, since there is no gold standard, there is no perfect solution for the TST, I think there's still a role, particularly until we have more information about our pediatric populations. So I also think that it's critically important that research continue. And I hope that some of the players that are in the business of developing iGRIs will continue to refine their products and make them more um, accessible from both a financial and distribution standpoint.
You know, I totally agree. I mean, and one of the big things that I think, would also kind of dictate this is, at least now, do you have access to iGRIS and how it's being used? So if it's okay with you, for 1 minute, what I'd like to do now is to switch over to some polling questions, about, iGRIS and, iGRIS and how you're using it. As a matter of fact, if we could do it, Donna, if you don't mind. Okay, we did the first one.
Great, yeah.
Do you have iGRIS testing available to utilize? And one of the things, John, I think you'd agree, is that you're seeing now that almost 65% of at least our participants do have iGRIS available, which is quite a difference from just a year ago when we had a similar webinar. Sundri, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I think, I don't recall exactly what the breakdown was previously, but that definitely looks like more programs have access to iGRIS. So we have got two questions going now. We have the second one. If you have iGRIS testing available, do you use it as your primary mode of testing, secondary, confirmatory testing for those who are THC positive, or don't use it at all? And this is interesting too, because we have a full 1/3 who actually have testing available who aren't using it.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. So you're seeing, you're seeing that, as you're saying, about 70% of individuals now are using the iGRIS LTBI testing. So to get to what kind of John was alluding to, we are definitely starting to see the switch, and you just wonder how much this shortage is definitely, is significant in, let's say, initiating or at least, encouraging or at least some programs are switching over to iGRIS maybe before they would have otherwise. So it's kind of interesting.
And again, we see, as we kind of had indications before, that a lot of programs are prioritizing who gets tested.
Mm-hmm. And then we put up on 14, just out of interest, since the PPD shortage, what changes have you made to your practice? And interestingly enough, only 4% say they switched to iGRIS, which means the vast majority were using iGRIS before, if you put this together. Where it says, I would say that about 17% of people have switched PPD antigens, applesol for tubasol, which again, I think is significant. I was very impressed with how many individuals were using tubasol instead of applesol.
Yeah,
and,
it was almost 90% tubasol.
What I think is really excellent is that 78% of individuals now are starting to prioritize their testing. Which I think, if there's one thing that came out of this, I think that's so important. Right. I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying, from Dick and Margaret's presentations, that's going to be the silver lining potentially, is really identifying those that are high risk for testing to start off with, and this may have started that whole process in places where they haven't been prioritizing at all yet. And then I want to note that as far as switching to iGRIS testing, that may be really difficult for programs that don't have the capacity for it yet. So that might be why there's only 4.5%, is that it takes a certain amount of startup time, laboratory quality assurance, in order to even perform iGRIS testing. It's only been a few months that we've had this shortage.
Just to address what you're saying, if the iGRIS testing is not your primary, which is our net, here it is, if iGRIS testing is not your primary mode of LTBI testing, what's the reason? So,
there we go.
Yeah, thanks.
TST is still tried and proven, iGRIS too expensive, iGRIS too difficult to obtain or perform, not enough known about iGRIS performance, and too many indeterminate results.
So it appears that that iGRIS is too expensive, and I totally agreed with that. I mean, I got to be honest, we're very surprised, and I see a couple people chatting. It's not just us, that with some negotiations, because there is some competition now, we were really able to negotiate a very low price. And I suspect, like everything else in this country, that I believe that as the demand increases and as people are using it more and more, that price will come down.
Yeah,
So
and I
it's
think,
still
Dave,
either-
it probably has to do also with the numbers of patients being tested, and then maybe the test might be less expensive in areas where they're using the test more. I also want to just note that people on the chat are asking for a risk assessment questionnaire, and I'm sure there's numerous different such questionnaires that are out there, and wondering if you guys could post some on your website.
We can get that done, sure, and I will work with the other RTMCCs because there's a lot of really good products on for that, and we'll make sure that they're available.
Right, and there are some that are already, I think already out there that RTMCCs have produced. So, and they may already be on our combined website, so the product's website, that is. So maybe, Donna, if you could just put up the product website for people to access. They're probably already there. Great. Did we have another polling question, or did you want to answer some of the other questions that have been asked?
Let's see if anybody, after these kind of questions, let's see if anybody else, we have a couple minutes left. Do we have anybody else who wants to ask a question on the line?
Star 7.
Hey, Dave, this is Kevin Fenley.
Hey, Kevin, what's up?
Not much, just had actually more comments. I'm sorry I've been going in and out, so I don't know if I might have missed this in the discussion. If so, I'll apologize ahead of time. But one of the things I've seen and heard in the calls I get is that, there's two roles for assessing LTBI. One is for the individual in terms of screening. The other is more population-based for surveillance in hospitals. And one of the issues I think people get confused with is that they often don't go back to the CDC's recommended risk assessment, and they'll be in a very low-risk facility, but they want to get, they'll get a quantiferon, then do that repeatedly every year for all the healthcare workers that are at low risk. So, a lot could probably be saved if you just followed the basic CDC risk assessment in the guidelines for preventing transmission. The other issue that I hadn't been aware of until just recently is that of timing of the of using the IGRAs relative to the TST. And there's a group from Spain that's published on this, one in the Scandinavian Journal of Infectious Diseases back in 2011. And, we're probably going to be seeing some more interesting data come out about this, but there's probably, a similar window for the quantiferon, maybe even longer than for the TST. So people should just consider that they may, if they're being used in a contact investigation to, wait at least 8 or 10 weeks.
Without a doubt. Kevin, thank you so much. And I think you brought up a great point, which, I think, we're always looking for better tests, but there's ways to make the tests better. And the risk assessment is not just about learning who we should screen, but it actually makes the test better. I mean, it's all based on Bayes' theorem, which is that whole concept that the accuracy of a test is really dependent on the prevalence of the condition in the population, which essentially, to make it simple, and I always like to use this, is that if you test 100,000 men for pregnancy with a beta HCG, you're going to get a number of positive tests for pregnancy, but I hope the men are not pregnant, I think. And, the whole idea behind that is that if you have a positive test in a population with a low risk for the condition, it's more likely the test is falsely positive than truly positive. Whereas if you test 100,000 women for pregnancy with the beta HCG, if you get a positive test, it's more likely to be true. So Kevin, your point is so well taken, and I think that's one of the most important messages, I think, is that we really got to get back to our risk assessments and making sure that we're using these tests in the population where the test can be most effective. It gives it its best chance. And I think not only will that help us with, conserving the antigen and everything and saving money, but it makes the test, much better. And I can't emphasize enough, that the risk assessment, as John said, is not only something that will help the test, but it's something that's very, very dynamic and is constantly changing. We have to reassess that. And that's why, like you said, Kevin, going back to those CDC guidelines are so key. So do we have another we have one more question I have, and then we're running out of time, and then we're going to close up. But You know, there's an interesting question that came up on the chat that says, it appears the shortage started with Tubasol, and that when customers started to switch from Tubasol to Applesol, there became a shortage of Applesol. And it says we've seen this type of trend in other, situations, and the writer says this poses a question: if a large number of customers switch to to the IGRAs, will this cause a shortage of an availability of IGRA tests? And John, I'm hoping that it's not the same process as to do an IGRA test it is to make tuberculin skin antigen. What do you think?
Well, I can respond to that partly. It's too bad Jerry Mazurik's not on the phone because he knows more about the technical requirements for producing the polypeptides that serve as antigens in the IgRAs. But those are synthetic polypeptides. And the scale-up of production probably would be relatively straightforward. Now, that doesn't mean that necessarily that the company is in a position to do a scale-up, but the limitations in terms of the standardization that we have to do for skin test antigens are just not the same. So I think that the scale-up is more feasible. You could say that it's more elastic, and the company could be more responsive and could produce more test kits more quickly than we could get more skin test antigen.
Well, John, thank you very, very much. We're about to close out. We're coming to the end, and I just wanted to first thank Sundry. Thank you so much, and CDC, and John, and Dick, and Margaret, and John for participating and putting this all together. I think we'd agree that, as I was saying before, the TB community is a very close, tight-knit community. And when we're having an issue, we feel it's very, very important that we all get together and share our experiences, share our knowledge, so that we could treat our patients the best possible. And that was the whole idea of the webinar, was really to help support the Health Alert Notice as well as the MMWR, and take a little time to share with us what's going on and making sure that you guys are up to date. So I want to thank you so much. I want to thank Sundry, and I'm going to turn it over to you in a second, Sundry, but I want to thank everybody for participating today, and I want to remind you that remember that this webinar, if you didn't get a chance to see it, will be it will be archived, and you can access it through the SNTC website, as well as the handouts are there too. So we really, really want to thank all of you. Again, we want to thank our brother and sister RTMCCs for helping support this. And other than that, I just want to remind you that we're always here for you. So thank you so much. And Sundry, I'm going to turn it to you.
Great. This was an excellent presentation by everyone. Again, thanks to all the speakers. And Donna Setzer, who really pulls together these webinars and makes them so easy to present. And Dave, thank you for the idea for having this webinar. All those questions that haven't been answered, we will run through them and try to get back to you by email if there's some burning question that actually has had no response. And you can always email us as well. I think, Dave, you'll be putting out the date and time of the next webinar where you're going to talk more about specific tests, because I did notice there's a lot of questions about quantiferon and T-spot and their use and how they're interpreted and that. Do you have a date yet for that?
Not yet, but what's happening right now is Donna, we're just going to send Donna to Hawaii to deliver some of the skin test antigen. Once she comes back, then we'll get everything set up.
Yeah, I noticed that a lot of people on the chat wanted to go to Hawaii, so I'm sure you have an invitation from Dr. Brostrom to visit the program. So, okay, thanks very much, everybody, and we'll try to get back to you with questions that are unanswered, and hopefully there'll be an end in sight to this problem soon.